In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a scientific graph using Excel. Now, when we're making a graph with Excel, it's the same process as when we're drawing it. However, Excel makes it just a lot easier. Okay, but we still follow the same rules. So using CUTLASS, the little acronym that helps us remember what to include in a graph, we know that C stands for crosses or columns. Now there's a certain time when you use crosses as well as columns, right? When your independent variable is quantitative, right? That is when you use crosses and you make a line graph. If, on the other hand, your independent variable is qualitative, that means it uses words, then you would make a column graph. Okay, so you make a line graph when the independent variable involves numbers or quantities, and you make a column graph when the independent variable is qualitative. It involves words. Okay, units in brackets. Our units must be in brackets next to the axes labels. Okay, T stands for title, right? We always include a title with our graph that explains what the data is showing us, what it was about, where did we get our data from. It must be meaningful. L stands for line or curve of best fit, if that applies. Now, if you're making a column graph, well, you're not going to use a line of best fit, okay? And when we make a line or curve of best fit, we make a line of best fit when it's got to do with some mathematical property, okay? When it's following some kind of equation, that's when we would use a line if it's linear, or a curve if it's not linear, okay? But if it's not following an equation, then we would typically do something that's more along the lines of joining the dots. And that's specifically when we are making a line graph and we're using crosses. A stands for axes labeled. Okay, we need to label each axis with the appropriate name. And specifically, right, the independent variable always goes on the X axis, and dependent always goes on the Y axis. Okay, always, always, always. S stands for the scale, and that the scale is even. We won't necessarily need to worry too much about that because Excel will do it for us. But sometimes if you get a really weird scale, you might need to, it will always be even, but maybe they're going up by really strange numbers and it makes the graph look a little strange. Sometimes you might need to format the graph slightly. Okay, and the last S stands for size, that the size is large, that it takes up, ideally, at least 75% of the graph paper. Now, we don't need to worry about that because using Excel, it'll automatically make the graph for us and make the size for us, and we can in fact just edit the size, zoom in and zoom out as we need. Okay, so those are the rules. Now let's apply those rules to make our graph in Excel. So we start off by double clicking the template file. Okay, we double click it, and I'm actually going to move it to the next screen. Okay, so this is the template file, and you can see that it says read only. Now what that means is you need to go to File, click Save As, then go to your OneDrive, and it's a similar process to what I showed in the making a table video, but navigate into your OneDrive to where you save your files for science, and then I'm going to name this scientific graph and save it there. Okay, why do I save it on OneDrive? Because it will automatically save as I put things in. I don't need to worry about losing my work and then having to come up with an excuse and try and convince Mr. Yan about that excuse. So, use OneDrive. Now, this is a very simple template. I haven't actually filled much out for you, but I've given you a little bit of a hint of what you should include. You should include the data from your independent variable and the data from the average of your dependent variable. Hopefully you've done your experiment multiple times, and if you have, hopefully then you've worked out the average, and that the data from the average is what we put in this column. Okay, so looking at the table that I made in the last video, okay, we've got the independent variable on the left and the dependent variable on the right. And you can see that we've gone trial 1, 2, 3, 4 trials, and then I worked out the average. Now, I'm only interested in 2 columns from this table. I'm interested in my independent variable column, and then I'm just interested in the average column. Okay, those are the only 2 columns I'm interested in. So I'm going to highlight my independent variable column. I'm going to click Command C to copy that. And then under my independent variable, I'm going to click Paste, right? Command V. And I'm actually going to edit this, the name of this. This says independent variable brackets units. Right, so I can double click the cell to start editing it, and I'm actually going to replace this with the type of liquid to water plants, and then the units didn't have any units, so I'm just going to remove that. And then I click return to apply that, and then see how it's sort of gone off the side there. I can't see it super clearly, so I'm just going to double click in between cells A and B, right, with the cursor looks like this. Double click that and it automatically moves it over. Okay, expands that cell so I can see it now. And then I'm just interested in the average. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the average data, Command C to copy it, and then once again go under the correct heading. In this time it's the average heading, and then Command V to paste it. Now I'm going to change the name of this from average dependent variable to average height. Average height of the plant. And the units were centimeters. Okay, so now I've put the data that is critical for making my graph. Now I need to think to myself, what graph am I going to make? Okay, am I going to make a line graph and use crosses, or am I going to make a column graph and use columns? Well, my independent variable involves words, so it's qualitative, so I'm going to make a column graph. Okay, I need to keep that in the back of my mind. So, how do I make a column graph? Well, we need to select the data first. So, put your cursor up near the A cell, and then you click on the top in this near this A button, and it's going to highlight that whole column. And then hold Command and click on the B column, and now we have selected all of the data. So I can just go to Insert at the top, and then over here is where we can insert graphs. Now I want to insert a column graph, so I'm going to click on the column graph button, and then I'm just going to use this first one. Okay, don't bother with any of the 3D ones and any of these other 2D ones. It's not really going to be super helpful for the kinds of experiments that we do. Pretty much this first one is the only one that you need for column graphs. And you can see here that most of the work is actually already done for me, right? if we think about Cutlass, right? In fact, let's think about Cutlass. What have we got so far? Have we got our columns? Well, yes, we have. Okay. Now, does it make sense? Did we get the right values? Okay, Coke was meant to be 23.4. Does it look like 23.4? Yeah, looks like that to me. Orange juice, 26.9. That looks about right. And water, 31.4. That looks right to me. So, have we completed letter C? Yes, we have. Okay. Units in brackets. We'll come back to that one. Title. Have we got a title? Well, not a great title. In fact, that's just the title from the dependent variable. So that's actually not going to be helpful to put there. In fact, I'm going to need to put that over on the side later on. So, what title could I use here? Well, if you've already made a title for your table, I mean, if it ain't broke, right? Copy, paste, right? If it works, it works. So I'm just going to click on this corner. Oops, rather. Oh, it's not letting me do that. Okay, let's click out of that. Click back in. No, okay, it's not letting me do that. That's all right. Just going to expand this then, just to give it a little bit more space. Okay, maybe increase the width a little bit so that it's all on one line. Okay, that's very good. So, have we now done the title? Yes, we have. Have we done a line of best fit? Well, we don't need to do that for this one. So, no, I don't need that. Have we labeled the axes? No, I need to label the axes now. So how do I do that? All right, you click on your graph so that it's highlighted. Come up to chart design at the top. Then click add chart element, axis titles. And we need to do this twice. So first one, we need to do the primary horizontal, and then we need to do both of that, all that again. So add chart element, axis titles, and now we need to add the vertical. And then I can just double click these boxes and add those titles in. Okay. So, and how do I get the names for these titles? Well, I've got the names from my table. So the independent variable was the type of liquid used to water the plants. And the independent variable was that, and then the dependent variable was the height the plants grew. And that is in centimeters. So I need to make sure I include that. Okay, paste that in. All right, so have I labeled my axes? Yes, I have. Is my scale even? Well, goes up by 5 every time, so that looks pretty even to me. Yep. Is the size large? Well, I can always just move this around to make it big enough. So, yep, that looks good to me. Let's go back up the top. Yep, I completed that one already. Units in brackets. Well, the independent variable didn't have any units, so I didn't need to worry about that. But the dependent variable had units, and I did include them in brackets. So yes, I have done that, which means I have ticked off everything that I need to tick off. Okay, which means my graph is complete. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this looks pretty ugly, right? I want to make it super fancy and whatnot. I would not worry about any of that. I mean, if you really want to, that's your choice. If you do want to edit the colors quite quickly, you can just double click your graph and then under fill, click on an element and then you can change it. So for example, Coke, right? Maybe I want to make Coke red. and then I click on orange, and maybe I want to make orange juice orange, and then water, I should want to change that back to more like a watercolor. Okay, so maybe you want to colorize your graph like that if you really want, but you don't have to. We don't mark aesthetics as long as we can see the data. Right, as long as you followed Cutlass, that's all you need to do. So once you have your finished graph, all we need to do is take a screenshot. So Command Shift Control 4, click on one corner of the graph, drag all the way to the other corner, and then let go. That takes the screenshot, and then I can go back to my OneNote, go to where it asks me to put my graph in, and then click Command V. Alright, now that's looking a little small, so I'm actually going to increase the size. Okay? And it's as simple as that. But that's for a column graph. What about if I actually had, what about if I had numbers for my independent variable? If I had quantitative data, how could I make a line graph using Excel? Well, very similar process, with pretty much only one difference. Okay, the one difference is just essentially what graph you choose. Okay, so let's say I've instead of the type of liquid, now I'm going to say the amount of liquid, and I'm actually going to include that milliliters in there. Okay, so double click this. I'm going to paste in my title there. So this is the amount of water, and then going to copy my independent variable data, same as I did before. Now I've actually kept this the same, but you would do the same thing. So copy the average column into your into the Excel file. Then we click on the A column, hold Command, click on the B column. Then we go to Insert. But this time, rather than clicking column, right, because we've got numbers, that's quantitative data, we need to make a line graph. We use crosses. Then instead, we go to a scatter plot. Okay. Now, if you were trying to plot like a mathematical equation, you would most likely put in a blank scatter plot, just like this, and then you can actually put in an R-squared line to do your line of best fit, or you might want to draw in your own line of best fit yourself. But for this, I'm going to keep it simple. We're not following a mathematical equation here, so I'm just going to click Scatter with smooth line and markers. And again, a lot of the work is done for us. In fact, the only thing I really need to do, I just need to make sure that the data is correct. Okay, so my independent variable should be at the bottom, and it should say there should be one at 50, one at 100, and one at 150. So, yep, that looks like that's at 50. This one looks like it's at 100. And this one looks like it's at 150. So that's correct. My independent variable is on the bottom, which is what I wanted. Now all I need to do is put everything else in from Cutlass, right? So I need to put my title in. So I can just copy and paste my title from my table. Okay. I'm going to increase the size of this just a little bit. That looks good to me. Next, I'm going to add the axis labels. Okay, so I click on my graph, add chart element, axis title. Let's do the horizontal first, and then same thing, but this time add the vertical. And then I can add in my labels, which I can just copy from my table. Okay, so my independent goes there, and then my dependent goes on the vertical. And similar to before, if you don't like colors, look, you can change it if you really want. Right, so you double click your graph to bring up the format menu, and then you can click on the elements that you want to adjust. Right, so okay, so I can click on the line. The line, maybe I want to change it to be easy to see, so let's make it a lighter blue. Okay, cool. Now I can very clearly see the line and the markers quite easily. Now, same as before, I finished my graph. I just need to take a screenshot, so Command Shift Control 4, Command Shift Control 4, and then click on one corner, drag it to the other corner, release to take the screenshot, and then paste the graph where you want it, and then resize as needed. Okay, so that is how you can make scientific graphs and format it a little bit using Excel. If you have any issues with it, please talk to your teacher and show them what you have so far. Thanks for watching.